Most educational models operate on a simple assumption: learning is additive. We build crystallized knowledge by layering facts through repetition and practice. Neuroscientists call this biological process automatization. As you practice a skill, your brain becomes highly efficient, physically shifting the cognitive workload from the active thinking areas in the front of your cortex to the automatic processing centers in the back. But that efficiency creates a trap. When you face a counterintuitive problem where a strict logical rule contradicts an automated assumption, your brain's fast perceptual pathway fires first. It reaches a conclusion before the slower logical pathway can even engage. Educators traditionally assume that explicitly teaching the correct logical rule will simply overwrite the student's incorrect automated reasoning. Accumulating logic is only one part of the process. Fluid intelligence relies on the active, physical de-automatization of the brain's default settings. Cognitive scientist Olivier Houdet designed an experiment around a classic reasoning trap. He tested students who already possessed the correct logical framework, but consistently chose the wrong, perceptually obvious answer. Students were split into 3 groups. Group A repeated the task. Group B received rational explanations. Both failed, with success rates below 10%. Group C received a warning about the perceptual trap, and their success rate skyrocketed to over 90%. Researchers called this specific intervention metacognitive inhibition. Mental logic was already present in these students. The failure was a missing biological mechanism to halt their own automated assumptions. This raises a central investigative question. What biological reconfiguration occurs when a trap warning succeeds where cold logic fails? To find out, researchers placed the students inside an fMRI scanner, observing their brain activity both before and after receiving the metacognitive inhibition training. Under automatic, habitual conditions, reasoning tasks light up the posterior or rear regions of the brain. That is the baseline state of automated error. The brain's manual override system, executive control, sits squarely in the prefrontal cortex at the very front of the brain. To prove the effectiveness of the training, scans needed to show a literal geographic migration of neural activity across the physical space of the cortex. The post-training scans revealed a reconfiguration of neural networks, with activity shifting away from the posterior regions and surging toward the anterior. This represents the brain actively suppressing a false intuition so that logic can prevail. The seat of this reconfiguration is the prefrontal cortex. This fMRI scan captures that anterior shift directly. In the frontal view of the brain on the bottom left, clear activation clusters emerge in the prefrontal region after the students learn to inhibit their perceptual bias. Notice how this reverses the standard flow of learning. While rote repetition pushes brain activity backward into effortless habit, breaking an ingrained error drags the cognitive process forcefully back to the front. Neuropedagogy provides a biological visualization of this effect. Teaching students to inhibit bias forces a structural reconfiguration of their neural network on the fly. But one anomaly remains. Why didn't the group that received the completely rational, logical explanation? These sagittal slices show the specific region that distinguishes the successful inhibition learners from the rest. The distinct yellow activation areas lie deep in the prefrontal region, specifically the right ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or VMPC. The VMPC is a paralimbic region, meaning it is deeply tied to emotion. Its role involves the complex feelings connected to self-awareness, and specifically the feeling of making and then corrective an error. Accessing deductive logic when faced with a cognitive trap is not a purely intellectual exercise. It requires an emotional response, the acute feeling of making a mistake mixed with the pleasure of correcting it. Looking at the study's bar graphs, we see individual evidence of this emotional requirement. The blue bars show students who corrected their error had active VMPC regions. The red bars underneath show those who persisted in errors after a logical lesson showed no such activation. Pure deduction, isolated from feeling, fails in these environments. Overriding a bias requires an emotional catalyst that cold logic inherently lacks. Researchers call this emotional catalyst reflective consciousness. The research suggests you cannot fix an error you cannot feel. Cold logic fails because it provides the right answer without generating the feeling of the wrong answer. It prioritizes activating knowledge over inhibiting certainty. We are seeing this research begin to influence modern education. Early childhood programs like Tools of the Mind are explicitly pivoting to teach cognitive control and inhibition right alongside traditional subjects. The objective of education shifts from simply accumulating facts to strengthening fluid intelligence, the capacity to pivot, to doubt your own assumptions, and to change cognitive strategies midstream. The learning brain ultimately depends on emotional awareness to recognize and strictly block its own automated assumptions.